Chapter 1 March 16th, 2005, 2:45 p.m. Afghanistan time, 5:15 a.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Bagram Air Base, Parwan Province, Afghanistan. "Luke, you don't have to do this," Colonel Don Morris said. Sergeant First Class Luke Stone stood at ease inside Don's office. The office itself was inside a glorified corrugated metal Quonset hut, not far from where the new runway was going in. The airbase was a wonderland of constant sound. There were earth movers digging and paving. There were construction workers hammering together hundreds of plywood bee huts to replace the tents that troops stationed here had previously lived in. And if that wasn't enough, there were Taliban rocket attacks from the surrounding mountains, and suicide bombers on motorcycles blowing themselves up at the front gates. Luke shrugged. His hair was longer than military guidance. He had a 3-day growth of beard on his face. He wore a flight suit with no indication of rank on it. "I'm just following orders, sir." Don shook his head. His own flat-top haircut was black, shot through with gray and white. His face could have been carved from granite. Indeed, his entire body could have been. His blue eyes were deep-set and intense. The color of his hair and the lines on his face were the only signs that Don Morris had been alive on Earth for more than 55 years. Don was packing the meager contents of his office into boxes. One of the legendary founders of Delta Force was retiring from the United States Army. He had been handpicked to launch and manage a small intelligence agency in Washington, D.C., a semi-autonomous group within the FBI. Don was referring to it as a civilian Delta Force. "Don't you dare call me sir," he said. "And if you're following orders today, then follow this one. Decline the mission." Luke smiled. "I'm afraid you're no longer my commanding officer. Your orders don't carry a lot of weight these days." "Sir?" Don's eyes met Luke's. He kept them there for a long moment. "It's a death trap, son. 2 years after the fall of Baghdad, the war effort in Iraq is a total balls up. Here in God's country, we control to the perimeter of this base, the Kandahar airport, downtown Kabul, and not a whole lot else. Amnesty International and the Red Cross and the European press are all screaming about black sites and torture prisons, including right here, 300 yards from where we're standing. The brass just want to change the narrative. They need a win in capital letters. And Heath wants a feather in his cap. That's all he ever wants. None of that is worth dying over." "Lieutenant Colonel Heath has decided to lead the raid personally," Luke said. "I was informed less than an hour ago." Don's shoulders slumped. Then he nodded. "No surprise there," he said. "You know what we used to call Heath? Captain Ahab. He gets fixated on something, some whale of a thing, and he will chase it to the bottom of the sea, and he'll be happy to take all his men with him." Don paused. He sighed. "Listen, Stone. You have nothing to prove to me or to anyone. You've earned a free pass. You can decline this mission. Hell, in a couple of months, you could leave the Army if you want. Come join me in D.C. I'd like that." Now Luke nearly laughed. "Don, not everybody around here is middle-aged. I'm 31 years old. I don't think a suit and tie and lunch at my desk is quite my speed just yet." Don held a framed photograph in his hands. It hovered above an open box. He stared down at it. Luke knew the photo well. It was a faded color snapshot of 4 shirtless young men, green berets, mugging for the camera before a mission in Vietnam. Don was the only one of those men who was still alive. "Me neither," Don said. He looked at Luke again. "Don't die out there tonight." I don't plan to. Don glanced at the photo again. No one ever does, he said. For a moment, he stared out the window at the snow-capped peaks of the Hindu Kush rising all around them. He shook his head. His broad chest rose and fell. Man, I'm going to miss this place. Gentlemen, this mission is suicide, the man at the front of the room said. And that's why they send men like us. Luke sat in a folding chair in the drab cinder-block briefing room. 22 other men sitting in the chairs around him. They were all Delta Force operators, the best of the best. And the mission, as Luke understood it, was difficult, but not necessarily suicide. The man giving this final briefing was Lieutenant Colonel Morgan Heath, as hands-on and gung-ho a commander as there was. Not yet 40 years old, it was clear that Delta was not the end of the line for Heath. He had rocketed up to his current rank, and his ambitions seemed to point toward a higher profile. Politics, maybe a book deal, maybe a stint on TV as a military expert. Heath was handsome, very fit, and over-the-top eager. That wasn't unusual for a Delta operator, but he also talked a lot, and that wasn't Delta at all. Luke had watched him a week earlier, giving an interview to a reporter and a photographer from Rolling Stone magazine, and walking the guys through the advanced stealth and navigational capabilities of an MH-53J helicopter. Not necessarily classified information, but definitely not the kind of thing you want to share with everyone. Stone almost called him on it, but didn't. He didn't, not because Heath outranked him. That didn't matter in Delta, or shouldn't, but because he could imagine ahead of time Heath's response. You think the Taliban read American pop magazines, Sergeant? Now, Heath's presentation was up-to-the-minute technology, for 10 years earlier. PowerPoint on a white backdrop. A young man in a turban with a dark beard appeared on the screen. You all know your man, Heath said. Abu Mustafa Faraj al-Jihadi was born sometime around 1970 among a tribe of nomads in eastern Afghanistan, or the tribal regions of western Pakistan. He probably had no formal education to speak of, and his family probably crisscrossed the border like it wasn't even there. Al-Qaeda runs in his veins. When the Soviets invaded Afghanistan in 1979, by all accounts he joined the resistance as a child soldier, possibly as young as 8 or 9 years old. All this time later, decades of non-stop war, and somehow he's still breathing. Heck, he's still rocking and rolling. We believe he's responsible for organizing at least 24 major terror attacks, including last October's suicide attacks in Mumbai and the bombing of the USS Sarasota at Port of Aden, in which 17 American sailors died. Heath paused for effect. He eyed everyone in the room. This guy is bad news. Getting him will be the next best thing to taking down Osama bin Laden. You guys want to be heroes? This is your night. Heath clicked a button in his hand. The photo on the screen changed. Now it was a split image. On one side of the vertical border was an aerial shot of al-Jihadi's compound, just outside a small village. On the other side was a 3D rendering of what was believed to be al-Jihadi's house. The house was 2 stories, made of stone, and built against a steep hill. Luke knew it was possible that the back of the house emptied into a tunnel complex. Heath launched into a description of how the mission would go. 2 choppers, 12 men on each. The choppers would set down in a field just outside the walls of the compound, unload the man, then take off again and provide aerial support. The 12 men of A-Team, Luke and Heath's team, would breach the walls, enter the house, and assassinate al-Jihadi. If possible, they would carry the body out in a stretcher and return it to base. If not, they would photograph it for later identification. B Team would hold the walls and the approach to the compound from the village. The choppers would then touch down again and extract both teams. If, for any reason, the choppers could not land again, the two teams would make their way to an old abandoned American forward fire base on a rocky hillside less than half a mile outside the village. Extraction would take place there, or the teams would hold the former base until extraction could occur. Luke knew all this by heart, but he didn't like the idea of a rendezvous at that old fire base. "What if the fire base is compromised?" he said. "Compromised? In what way?" Heath said. Luke shrugged. "I don't know. You tell me. Booby-trapped? Staffed up by Taliban snipers? Used by sheep herders as a place to gather their flock?" Around the room, a few people laughed. "Well," Heath said, "our most recent satellite images show the place empty. If there are sheep up there, then there'll be nice bedding and plenty to eat. Don't worry, Sergeant Stone. This is going to be a precision decapitation strike. In and out. Gone, almost before they realize we're there. We're not going to need the old fire base."
"Madre de Dios, Stone," Robbie Martinez said. "I got a bad feeling about this one, man. Look at that night out there. No moon, cold, howling winds. We're going to catch some dust for sure. We're going to catch hell tonight. I know it."
Martinez was small, slim, razor-sharp. There was not a wasted ounce of meat on his body. When he worked out in shorts and no shirt, he looked like a drawing of the human anatomy, each muscle group carefully delineated. Luke was checking and rechecking his pack and his weapons. "You always got a bad feeling, Martinez," Wayne Hendricks said. He was sitting next to Luke. "The way you talk, a man would think you never saw combat before." Hendricks was Luke's best buddy in the military. He was a big, thick-bodied hunk from the redneck wilds of north-central Florida who had grown up hunting boar with his dad. He was missing his right front tooth, punched out in a bar fight in Jacksonville when he was 17, and never replaced. He and Luke had almost nothing in common, except football. Luke had been the quarterback on his varsity squad. Wayne had played tight end. Even so, they had clicked the minute they first discovered each other in the 75th Rangers. It seemed like they did everything together. Wayne's wife was 8 months pregnant. Luke's wife, Rebecca, was 7 months along. Wayne had a girl coming, and had asked Luke to be her godfather. Luke had a boy coming, and had asked Wayne to be the boy's godfather. One night, while drunk at a bar outside Fort Bragg, Luke and Wayne had cut open their right palms with a serrated knife and shaken hands. Blood brothers. Martinez shook his head.
"You know where I've been, Hendricks. You know what I've seen. I wasn't talking to you anyway."
Luke glanced out the open bay door. Martinez was right. The night was cold and windy. Frigid dust blew across the pad as the choppers prepared for takeoff. Clouds skidded across the sky. It was going to be a bad night for flying. All the same, Luke felt confident. They had what they needed to win this. The helicopters were MH-53J Pavlos, the most advanced and most powerful transport choppers in the United States arsenal. They had state-of-the-art terrain-following radar, which meant they could fly very low. They had infrared sensors, so they could fly in bad weather, and they could reach a top speed of 165 miles per hour. They were armor-plated to shrug off all but the heaviest ordnance the enemy might have. And they were flown by the U.S. Army 160th Special Operations Aviation Regiment, codename Night Stalkers. the Delta Force of helicopter pilots, probably the best chopper pilots in the world. The raid was scheduled for a night with no moonlight, so the helicopters could enter the operation area low to the ground and undetected. The choppers were going to use hilly terrain and nap-of-the-earth techniques to reach the compound without appearing on radar and alerting any unfriendlies, especially the Pakistani military and intelligence services, who were suspected to be cooperating with the Taliban in hiding the target. With friends like the Pakistanis. The low-slung buildings of the airbase and the larger flight control tower squatted against the staggering backdrop of the snow-capped mountains. As Luke stared out the bay door, 2 fighter jets took off a quarter-mile away, the scream of their engines nearly deafening. A moment later, the jets reached the sound barrier somewhere in the distance. The takeoffs were loud, but the sonic booms were muted by the wind at high altitude. The chopper's engine whined into life. The rotor blades began to turn, slowly at first, then with increasing speed. Luke glanced along the line. 10 men in jumpsuits and helmets, not including himself, were all compulsively checking and rechecking their gear. The 12th, Lieutenant Colonel Heath, was leaning into the cockpit of the front of the chopper, talking to the pilots.
"I'm telling you, Stone,"
Martinez said. "I heard you the first time, Martinez."
"Good luck don't last forever, man. One fine day, it runs out."
"I don't worry, because it ain't luck in my case," Wayne said. "It's skill." Martinez sneered at that.
"A big fat bastard like you? You're lucky every time a bullet doesn't hit you. You're the biggest, slowest thing out here."
Luke suppressed a laugh and went back to his gear. His weapons included an HK-416 assault rifle and an MP5 for close-quarter fighting. The guns were loaded, and he had extra magazines stuffed in his pockets. He had a SIG P226 sidearm, 4 grenades, a cutting and breaching tool, and night vision goggles. This particular night vision device was the GPNV G18, far more advanced and with a much better field of view than the standard night vision goggles offered to typical servicemen. He was ready to rock. Luke felt the chopper taking off. He glanced up. They were on the move. To their left, he saw the second helicopter, also leaving its pad. "You guys are the luckiest men alive, as far as I'm concerned," he said.
"Oh, yeah?"
Martinez said.
"Why's that?"
Luke shrugged and smiled. "You're riding with me." The chopper flew low and fast. The rocky hills buzzed by below them, maybe 200 feet down, almost close enough to touch. Luke watched the inky darkness through the window. He guessed they were moving at over 100 miles per hour. The night was black, and they were flying without lights. He couldn't even see the second helicopter out there. He blinked and saw Rebecca instead. She was something to behold. It wasn't so much the physical details of her face and body, which were indeed beautiful. It was the essence of her. In the years they'd been together, he had come to see past the physical. But time was passing so fast. The last time he had seen her, when was that? 2 months ago? Her pregnancy had just been beginning to show. "I need to get back there." Luke glanced down. His MP5 was across his lap. For a split second, it almost seemed alive, like it might suddenly decide to start firing on its own. What was he doing with this thing? He had a child on the way. "Gentlemen," a voice shouted. Luke nearly jumped out of his skin. He looked up, and Heath stood in front of the group. "We are approaching target. ETA approximately 10 minutes. I just got a report from base. The high winds have kicked up a bunch of dust. We're going to hit some weather between here and the target." "Terrific," Martinez said. He looked at Luke, all the meaning in his eyes. "What's that supposed to mean, Martinez?" Heath said.
"I love weather, sir,"
Martinez shouted. Oh, yeah? Heath said. Why's that?
It ramps the pucker factor up to 12. Makes life more exciting.
Heath nodded. Good man. You want excitement? It looks like we might be landing in 0-0 conditions. Luke didn't like the sound of that. 0-0 meant zero ceiling, zero visibility. The pilots would be forced to let the chopper's navigation system do the sighting for them. That was okay. What was worse was the dust. Here in Afghanistan, it was so fine that it flowed almost like water. It could come through the tiniest cracks. It could get into gearboxes and into weapons. Clouds of dust could cause brownouts, completely obscuring any unfriendly obstacles that might be waiting in the landing zone. Dust storms stalked the nightmares of every airborne soldier in Afghanistan. As if on cue, the chopper shuddered and got hit with a blast of sideways wind. And just like that, they were inside the dust storm. The sound outside the chopper changed. A moment ago, the loud whir of the rotors and the roar of the wind was all you could hear. Now the sound of the spitting dust hitting the outside of the chopper competed with the other two sounds. It sounded almost like rain. "Call the dust," Heath shouted. Men were at the windows, peering outside of the boiling cloud. "Dust at the tail wheel," someone shouted. "Dust at the cargo door," Martinez said. "Dust at the landing gear. Dust at the cockpit door." Within seconds, the chopper was engulfed. Heath repeated each call out into his headset. They were flying blind now, the chopper pushing through a thick, dark sky. Luke stared out at the sand hitting the windows. It was hard to believe they were still airborne. Heath touched a hand to his helmet. Pirate 2, Pirate 2. Yes, copy. Go ahead, Pirate 2. Heath had radio contact with all aspects of the mission inside his helmet. Apparently, the second helicopter was calling him about the storm. He listened. "Negative on return to base, Pirate 2. Continue as planned." Martinez's eyes met Luke's again. He shook his head. The chopper bucked and swayed. Luke looked down the line of men. These were hardened fighters, but not one of them looked eager to continue this mission. "Negative on set down, Pirate 2. We need you on this." Heath stopped and listened again. "Mayday? Already?" He waited. Now he looked at Luke. His eyes were narrow and hard. He didn't seem frightened. He seemed frustrated. "I lost them. That's our support. Can't any of you guys see them out there?" Martinez looked out the window. He grunted. It wasn't even night anymore. There was nothing to see out there but brown dust. Pirate 2, can you read me?" Heath said. He waited a beat. "Come in, Pirate 2. Pirate 2. Pirate 2. Heath paused. Now he listened. "Pirate 2. Status report. Status." He shook his head and looked at Luke again. "They crashed." He listened again. "Minor injuries only. Helicopter disabled. Engines dead." Suddenly, Heath punched the wall near his head. "Damn it!" He glared at Luke. "Son of a bitch! The cowards! They ditched. I know they did. It just so happens their instrumentation failed. They got lost in the storm, and they crashed 7 miles from a 10th Mountain Division bivouac. How convenient. They're going to walk there." He paused. A breath of air escaped him. "Doesn't that beat all? I never thought I'd see a Delta Force unit DD a mission." Luke watched him. DD meant done deal. It meant disappearing, laying low, bowing out. Heath suspected that Pirate 2 had pulled the plug on the operation themselves. Maybe they had, maybe they hadn't. But it might be the right thing to do. "Sir, I think we should turn around," Luke said. "Or maybe we should set this thing down. We have no support unit. And I don't think I've ever seen a storm." Heath shook his head. "Negative, Stone. We continue with minor edits. 6-man team raids the house. 6-man team holds the village approaches." "Sir, with all due respect, How is this chopper going to land and take off again? No landing, Heath said. We'll fast rope down. Then the chopper can go vertical and find the top of this storm, wherever it is. They can come back when we have their target secured. Morgan, Luke began, addressing his superior officer by his first name, a convention he could only get away with in a few places, one of them being Delta Force. Heath shook his head. No, Stone. I want Al-Jihadi, and I'm going to have him. This storm doubles our element of surprise. They'll never expect us to come out of the sky on a night like this. Mark my words. We're going to be legends after this. He paused, staring directly into Stone's eyes. ETA 5 minutes. Make sure you have your men ready, Sergeant. Okay. Luke shouted over the roar of the engines and the chopper blades and the sand spitting against the windows. Listen up. The two lines of men stared at him, in jumpsuit and helmets, weapons at the ready. Heath watched him from the far end. These were Luke's men, and Heath knew it. Without Luke's leadership and cooperation, Heath could quickly have a mutiny on his hands. For a split second, Luke remembered what Don had said. We used to call him Captain Ahab. Mission plan has changed. Pirate 2 is 100% snafu. We are pressing forward with Plan B. Martinez, Hendricks, Colley, Simmons, you're with me and Lieutenant Colonel Heath. We are A-Team. We will move into the house, eliminate any opposition, acquire the target, and terminate. We are going to be moving very fast. Go mode. Understood? Martinez, as always.
Stone, how you plan to make this a 12-man assault? It's a 24-man.
Luke stared at him. I said, understood? Various grunts and growls indicated they understood. No one resists us, Luke said. Someone shoots, someone so much as shows a weapon, they're out of the game. Copy? He glanced through the windows. The chopper fought through a brown shitstorm, moving fast, but well below its max airspeed. Visibility out there was 0, less than 0. The chopper shuddered and lurched as if to confirm that assessment. Copy, the men around him said. Copy that. Packard, Hastings, Morrison, Dobbs, Murphy, Bailey, you are B-Team. B-Team, you support and cover us. When we drop, 2 of you hold the drop spot, 2 hold the perimeter near the gates of the compound. When we go inside, 2 move forward and hold the front of the house. You're also the last men out. Eyes sharp, heads on a swivel. Nobody moves against us. Eliminate all resistance and any possible resistance. This place is bound to be hotter than hell. Your job is to make it cold. He looked at them all. Are we clear? A chorus of voices followed, each of differing depth and timbre. Clear, clear, clear. Luke crouched on a low-slung bench in the personnel hold. He felt that old trickle of fear, of adrenaline, of excitement. He had swallowed a Dexedrine right after takeoff, and it was starting to kick in. Suddenly, he felt sharper and more alert than before. He knew the drug's effects. His heart rate was up. His pupils were dilating, letting in more light and making his vision better. His hearing was more acute. He had more energy, more stamina, and he could remain awake for a long time. Luke's men sat forward on their benches, eyes on him. His thoughts were racing ahead of his ability to speak. Children, he said, watch for them. We know there are women and children in the compound, some of them family members of the target. We are not shooting women and children tonight. Copy? Resigned voices answered. Copy that. Copy. It was an inevitability of these assignments. The target always lived among women and children. The missions always happened at night. There was always confusion. Children tended to do unpredictable things. Luke had seen men hesitate to kill children, and then pay the price when the children turned out to be soldiers who didn't hesitate to kill them. To make matters worse, their teammates would then kill the child soldiers 10 seconds too late, People died in war. They died suddenly and often for the craziest reasons, like not wanting to kill children, who were dead a minute later anyway. That said, don't die out there tonight, and don't let your brothers die. The chopper rolled on, blasting through the spitting, shrieking darkness. Luke's body swayed and bounced with the helicopter. Outside, there was flying dirt and grit all around them. They were going to be out there a few moments from now. If we catch these guys napping, we might have an easy time of this. They're sure not expecting us tonight. I want to drop in, acquire the target inside 10 minutes, and load back up within 15 minutes. The chopper rocked and bucked. It fought to remain in the air. Luke paused and took a breath. Do not hesitate. Seize the initiative and keep it. Push them and push them. Make them afraid. Do what comes naturally. This, after just telling them to watch for children. He was sending mixed messages. He knew that. He had to get on script, but it was hard. A dark night, an insane dust storm, one chopper down before the mission even started, and a commanding officer who would not turn around. A thought went through his mind, laser fast, so fast he almost didn't recognize it. Abort. Abort this mission. He looked at the two lines of men. They looked back at him. The normal enthusiasm these guys would show was sorely lacking. A couple of sets of eyes glanced out the windows. Sand was spraying against the helicopter. It was like the chopper was a submarine underwater, except the water was made out of dust. Luke could abort the mission. He could overrule Heath. These guys would follow him over Heath. They were his guys, not Heath's. The payback would be hell, of course. Heath would come for him. Don would try to protect Luke, but Don would be a civilian. The charges would be insubordination at best, mutiny at worst. A court-martial was practically guaranteed. Luke knew the precedents. A lunatic suicidal order was not necessarily an unlawful order. He would lose any court-martial case. He was still staring at the men. They were still staring at him. He could see it in their eyes, or thought he could. Call it off. Luke shook that away. He looked at Wayne. Wayne raised his eyebrows, gave a slight shrug. Up to you. All right, boys, Luke said. Hit hard and fast tonight. No screwing around. We go in, we do our jobs, and we get right back out again. Trust me, this won't hurt a bit. Chapter 2. 10:01 p.m. Afghanistan time. 1:01 p.m. Eastern Daylight Time. Near the Pakistan border. Kamdesh District, Nuristan Province, Afghanistan. Go! Luke shouted. Go! 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 Two thick ropes descended from the bay door of the chopper. Men dropped down them, then disappeared into the swirling dust. They could be 1,000 feet in the air, or 10 feet above the playground. The wind howled. Biting sand and dirt sprayed in. Luke's face was covered by a ventilator mask. He and Heath were the last ones out the door. Heath wore a similar mask. They looked like two survivors of a nuclear war. Heath looked at Luke. His mouth moved beneath his mask. We're gonna be legends, Stone. Luke hit the green start button on his stopwatch. This had better be quick. He glanced below him. He couldn't see a damn thing down there, or anywhere. It was all on faith. He went over the side and fell through bleak darkness. 2 seconds later, maybe 3, he touched down hard on the ground. The landing sent a shockwave up his legs. He released the rope and looked around, trying to get his bearings. Heath landed a second later. Men in masks appeared out of the gloom. Martinez, Hendricks. Hendricks gestured behind him. There's the wall. Something large loomed back there. Okay, that was the wall to the compound. A couple of dim lights shone on top of it. Hendricks was saying something, but Luke couldn't hear it. What? I know. They know? Who? Knew what? Above their heads, the sound of the chopper's engines changed as it began to rise away. Suddenly, a bright light flashed from on top of the wall. Something zipped by, screaming as it did. Mortar. "Incoming!" Luke screamed. "Incoming!" All around him, vague shadows threw themselves to the ground. 2 more flashes of light launched. Then another. Then another. How did they know? In the black darkness of the sky, something exploded. It blew up in muted orange and red. In the sandstorm, the explosion sounded like the crackling of distant thunder. The chopper. It was hit. From his vantage point of the ground, Luke watched it circle in the sky, an orange streak against the black. It looped toward the right, spinning now. Its engine screamed, and Luke thought he could hear the sound of its blades. Whump, 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 whump. It seemed to move in slow motion, sideways and down. It lit up the night like a tracer as it passed over the stone wall of the compound. Boom! It exploded on the other side of the wall, inside the compound. A fireball went up, 2 or 3 stories high. For an instant, Luke imagined it was all over. Chopper down, pilots dead. Support chopper inoperable. They were trapped here, and the Taliban seemed to have known they were coming. But that helicopter just blew apart inside the compound, like a bomb. And that might give them the initiative. Several men in masks lay nearby. Martinez, Hendricks, Colley, Simmons. His team. Heath had to be around here somewhere. "Up!" Luke shouted. "Up! Let's go!" He jumped to his feet, dragging the nearest person with him. In an instant, they were all up and running, a dozen men moving fast. Night vision was useless. Lights were useless and would draw fire. They simply ran in total spinning darkness. In 10 seconds, they reached the wall. Luke guessed left and moved that way, hugging the stone. Within a few seconds, he came to the opening. There was the chopper, an apocalypse. A few silhouettes ran to the light from the flames, pulling wounded away from it. Luke didn't hesitate. He ran through the opening, his MP5 out now. He gave them a burst from the gun, a blat of automatic fire. Now the silhouettes were running away, back toward another looming shadow, lights beckoning in the chaos. The house. His men were running with him. Up ahead, the silhouettes of the retreating men sprinted up the small flight of stairs to the stone house. Luke sprinted up the stairs behind them. 2 men faced the doorway, pulling automatic weapons down from their shoulders. They wore the long beards and head wraps of the Taliban. Pop, 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 pop. Luke fired without thinking about it. The 2 men fell. Suddenly, there was an explosion behind him. He glanced back. It was impossible to see what was going on. He moved into the house. An instant later, 4 more men appeared next to him, his A-team. They took up firing positions in the stone foyer, facing in toward the rest of the house. They removed their ventilator masks simultaneously, almost as if they were one person. Martinez went to the downed Taliban and shot each one in the head. He didn't touch either one of them. "Dead," he said. It was quieter here. "B-team leader," Luke said into his helmet mic. "Status?" Heath came running into the house out of the darkness. "B-team leader?" "We're holding the front gate," a voice said inside Luke's helmet. It was Murphy. His Bronx accent was unmistakable. "Stone, this don't look good. That was an ambush. They were waiting for us." "Just hold the gate, Murph. We'll be out in a couple of minutes." "You better hurry, man. Somebody knew we were coming. Won't be long before there's more of them. And I can't see 10 feet in front of my nose." Luke's team had already moved further into the house. Heath went in right behind them. "Hang in there. We're inside." "Make it quick," Murphy's voice said. "I don't know if we're still going to be here." "Murphy, hold that gate. We'll be right out." "Aye, aye," Murphy said. Luke turned toward the darkened corridor. Another man appeared, a big man in a white robe. He managed to reach his trigger, but he fired wildly. Luke kneeled, drew a bead on the man. Pop! A dark red circle appeared on his chest. He seemed surprised, but then slid bonelessly to the floor. Now Luke moved through the dark hallways, listening for sounds up ahead. He didn't have to listen long. Bang! A flashbang went off, then another. Bang! There was shouting and gunfire up ahead. Luke moved slowly toward it, snaking along the wall. Now there were sounds behind him, out on the grounds, automatic fire and explosions. Luke checked his stopwatch. They'd been on the ground for less than 4 minutes, and the whole mission was already foobar. "Stone!" Murphy's voice again. "Trouble! Barbarians at the gates! I repeat, front gates under attack! Unfriendlies converging! Men down! Hastings down! Bailey down! We are falling back to the house!" Negative, B-Team. Hold those gates." "There's nothing to hold," Murphy said. "They're ripping it up. They got an anti-tank gun out there." "Hold it anyway. It's our only way out of here." "Damn it, Stone." "Murphy, hold those gates." Luke ran further into the house. There was screaming just ahead of him. He ran through a doorway, crossed the threshold, and came upon a scene of total chaos. There were at least 15 people in a large back room. The floors were covered in thick, overlapping carpets. The walls were hung with carpets, ornate, richly colored carpets depicting vast landscapes, deserts, mountains, jungles, waterfalls. Simmons was dead. He lay on his back, his body splayed, his eyes open and staring. His helmet was off, and a chunk of his head above the eyes was gone. 2 women were also dead. A small child, a boy, was dead. 3 men in robes and turbans were dead. It was a massacre in here. There were guns and blood all over the floor. At the very back, near a closed door, a mass of people stood. A crowd of men in robes and turbans held children in front of them and pointed rifles outward. Behind the men, another man lurked. He was hidden enough that Luke could barely see him. He must be the target. All around the chamber, Luke's team crouched or kneeled, still as statues, their guns trained on the group, looking for a shot. Lieutenant Colonel Heath stood in the center of the room, his MP5 machine gun pointed into the crowd. "Okay," Luke said. "It's okay. Nobody do any—" "Drop those weapons," Heath shouted in English. His eyes were wild. He was focused on one thing, getting that whale. "Heath," Luke said, "relax. There's children. We can—" "I see the children, Stone. So let's just—" Heath fired, a burst of full auto. Instantly, Luke hit the ground as gunfire broke out in all directions. He covered his head, curled into a ball, and turned his back to the action. The shooting lasted several seconds. Even after it stopped, a few shots continued, one every few seconds, like the last of the popcorn popping. When it was finally over, Luke picked his head up. The knot of people by the closed door lay in a writhing pile. Heath was down. Luke didn't care about that. Heath was the cause of this nightmare. Another of Luke's men was down, over in the corner. God, what a mess. 3 men down, an unknown number of civilians dead. Luke climbed to his feet. 2 other men stood at the same time. One was Martinez, the other was Colley. Martinez and Colley converged on the pile of people near the back, moving slowly, guns still drawn. Luke glanced around the room. There were corpses everywhere. Simmons was dead. Heath. A large hole had been punched through his head where his face had been. The man had no face, Luke felt nothing about that. This was Heath's mission. It had gone as wrong as possible. Now Heath was dead. And one more man was down. It seemed like a complicated math problem, but really it was simple subtraction that anyone could do. Luke's mind was not working correctly. He recognized that. 6 men had come in here. Heath and Simmons were dead. Martinez, Colley, and Stone were still in the game. That meant the last man down could only be... Luke ran to the man. Yes, it was. It was Hendricks. Wayne! Wayne! He was still moving. Luke kneeled by him and pulled off his helmet. Wayne's arms and legs were moving slowly, almost like he was treading water. Wayne! Wayne! Where are you hit? Wayne's eyes rolled. They found Luke. He shook his head. He began to cry. He was breathing heavily, almost gasping for air. "Oh, buddy," Wayne said. "Wayne, talk to me." Feverishly, Luke began to unfasten Wayne's ballistic vest. "Medic!" he screamed. "Medic!" An instant later, Colley was there, kneeling behind him. "Simpson was the medic. I'm the backup." Wayne was hit in the chest. Somehow, shrapnel had gotten under his vest. Luke's hands searched him. He was also shot high in the leg. That was worse than the chest by a lot. His pants were saturated with blood. His femoral artery must be hit. Luke's hand came away, dripping red. There was blood everywhere. There was a lake of it under Wayne's body. It was a miracle he was still alive. "Tell Katie," Wayne said. "Shut up," Luke said. "You're going to tell her yourself." Wayne's voice was barely above a whisper. "Tell her..." Wayne seemed to be looking at something far away. He gazed, and then did a double take, as if confused by what he was seeing. An instant later, his eyes became still. He stared at Luke. His mouth was slack. Nobody was home. "Oh, God, Wayne, no." Luke looked at Colley. It was as if he were seeing Colley for the first time. Colley looked young, like barely old enough to shave. That couldn't be, of course. The man was in Delta Force. He was a trained killer. He was a consummate pro. But his neck looked about as thick as Luke's forearm. He seemed to be swimming in his clothes. "Check him," Luke said, though he already knew what Colley would say. He fell back into a cross-legged position and sat that way for a long moment. They had a day off during Ranger School one time. A bunch of guys held a pickup game of football. It was a hot day, and the game was shirts versus skins. Luke spent the game throwing laser strikes to this big, thick, foul-mouthed redneck with a front tooth missing. "Wayne..." "He's gone," Colley said. Just like that, Wayne was dead. Luke's blood brother. The godfather of Luke's unborn son. A long, helpless breath went out of Luke. In war, Luke knew, that's how it went. 1 second, your friend, or your sister, or your wife, or your child was alive. The next second, they were gone. There was no way to turn back that clock, not even 1 second. Wayne was dead. They were a long way from home. And this night was just getting started. "Stone," Martinez said. Luke pulled himself to his feet once again. Martinez stood by the pile of corpses that had once protected the target. All of them appeared to be dead, all but one, the man who had stood at the back. He was tall, still youthful, with a long black beard speckled with a little gray. He lay among the fallen, shot full of holes, but alive. Martinez pointed a pistol down at him. "What's the guy's name? The one we're looking for?" "Abu Mustafa Faraj al-Jihadi," Luke said. It wasn't really a question. There wasn't anything, just a string of syllables. The man nodded. He didn't say anything. He looked like he was in some pain. Luke took a small digital camera from inside his vest. The camera was encased in hard rubber. You could bounce it off the floor and it wouldn't break. He fidgeted with it for a second, and then took a few snaps of the man. He checked the images before he turned the camera off. They were fine. Not exactly professional quality, but Luke didn't work for National Geographic. All he needed was evidence. He looked down at the terrorist leader. "Gotcha," Luke said. "Thanks for playing." Bang! Martinez fired once, and the man's head came apart. "Mission accomplished," Martinez said. He shook his head and walked away. Luke's radio crackled. "Stone! Where are you?" "Murphy, what's the status?" Murphy's voice cut in and out. "It's a bloodbath out here. I lost 3 men. But we commandeered one of their big guns, and we cut an opening. If we want to get out of here, we need to go, right now." "We'll be out in a minute." "I wouldn't take that long," Murphy said. "Not if you want to live." 6 men ran through the village. After all that fighting, the place was like a ghost town. At any second, Luke was expecting gunshots or rockets to come screaming out of the tiny homes. But nothing happened. There didn't even seem to be any people left here. Back the way they had come, smoke rose. The walls of the compound were destroyed. The helicopter still burned, the flames crackling in the eerie quiet. Luke could hear the heavy breathing of the other men running uphill with gear and weapons. In 10 minutes, they made it to the old forward operating base on the rocky hillside outside the village. To Luke's surprise, the place was okay. There were no supplies cached there, of course, but the sandbags were still in place, and the location gave a commanding view of the surrounding area. Luke could see lights on in the homes, and the chopper on fire. "Martinez, see if you can raise Bagram on the radio. We need an extraction. Hide and seek is over. Tell them to send overwhelming force. We need to get back inside that compound and bring our men out." Martinez nodded.
"I told you, man. Luck runs out for everybody."
"Don't tell me, Martinez. Just get us out of here, okay?"
"All right, Stone."
It was a dark night. The sandstorm had passed. They still had weapons. Along the sandbagged rampart, his men were loading up ammo and checking gear. It wasn't out of the question that... "Murphy, send a flare-up," he said. "I want to get a look at what we're dealing with." "And give away our position?" Murphy said. "I think they probably know where we are," Luke said. Murphy shrugged and popped one into the night. The flare moved slowly across the sky, casting eerie shadows on the rocky terrain below. The ground almost appeared to be boiling. Luke stared and stared, trying to make sense of what he was seeing. There was so much activity down there, it was like an ant farm or a swarm of rats. It was men. Hundreds of men were methodically moving themselves, their gear, and their weapons into position. "I guess you're right," Murphy said. "They know we're here." Luke looked at Martinez. "Martinez, what's the status on that extraction?" Martinez shook his head.
"They say it's a no-go. Nothing but wicked sandstorms between base and here. Zero visibility. They can't even put the choppers in the air. They say hold out till morning. The wind's supposed to die down after sunrise."
Luke stared at him. "They have to do better than that." Martinez shrugged.
"They can't. If the choppers won't fly, the choppers won't fly. I wish those storms had come in before we left."
Luke stared out at the seething mass of Taliban on the hillsides below them. He turned back to Martinez. Martinez opened his mouth as if to speak. Luke pointed at him. "Don't say it. Just get ready to fight."
I'm always ready to fight,
Martinez said. The shooting started moments later. Martinez was screaming.
They're coming through on all sides.
His eyes were wide. His guns were gone. He had taken an AK-47 from a Taliban and was bayoneting everyone who came over the wall. Luke watched him in horror. Martinez was an island, a small boat in a sea of Taliban fighters. And he was going under. Then he was gone, under a pile. They were just trying to live until daybreak, but the sun refused to rise. The ammunition had run out. It was cold, and Luke's shirt was off. He had ripped it off in the heat of combat. Turbaned, bearded Taliban fighters poured over the walls of the outpost. Men screamed all around him. A man came over the wall with a metal hatchet. Luke shot him in the face. The man lay dead against the sandbags. Now Luke had the hatchet. He waded into the fighters surrounding Martinez, swinging wildly. Blood spattered. He chopped at them, sliced them. Martinez reappeared back on his feet, stabbing with a bayonet. Luke buried the hatchet in a man's skull. It was deep. He couldn't pull it out. Even with the adrenaline raging through his system, he didn't have the strength left. He looked at Martinez. "You okay?" Martinez shrugged. He gestured at the bodies all around him.
"I've been better than this before, I'll tell you that."
There was an AK-47 at Luke's feet. He picked it up and checked the magazine. Empty. Luke tossed it away and pulled his handgun. He fired down the trench. It was overrun with enemies. A line of them were running this way. More came sliding, falling, jumping over the wall. Where were his guys? Was anyone else still alive? He killed the closest man with a shot to the face. The head exploded like a cherry tomato. He grabbed the man by his tunic and held him up as a shield. The headless man was light. It was as if the corpse was an empty suit of clothes. He killed 4 men with 4 shots. He kept firing. Then he was out of bullets. Again. A Taliban charged with an AK-47, bayonet attached. Luke pushed the corpse at him, then threw his gun like a tomahawk. It bounced off the man's head, distracting him for a second. Luke used that time. He stepped into the attack, sliding along the edge of the bayonet. He plunged 2 fingers deep into the man's eyes and pulled. The man screamed. His hands went to his face. Now Luke had the AK. He bayoneted his enemy in the chest 2, 3, 4 times. He pushed it in deep. The man breathed his last right into Luke's face. Luke's hands roamed the man's body. The fresh corpse had a grenade in its breast pocket. Luke took it, pulled it, and tossed it over the rampart into the oncoming hordes. He hit the deck. Boom! The explosion was right there, spraying dirt and rock and blood and bone. The sandbagged wall half collapsed on top of him. Luke clawed his way to his feet, deaf now, his ears ringing. He checked the AK. Empty, but he still had the bayonet. "Come on, you bastards!" he screamed. "Come on!" More men came over the wall, and he stabbed them in a frenzy. He ripped and tore at them with his bare hands. He shot them with their own guns. A man came over what was left of the wall. He wasn't a man. He was a boy. He had no beard. He had no need of a razor. His skin was smooth and dark. His brown eyes were round in terror. He clutched his hands to his chest. Luke faced off with this child. The kid was maybe 14. There were more coming behind him. They slid and crashed over the barrier. The passageway was choked with corpses. Why are his hands like that? Luke knew why. He was a suicide bomber. "Grenade!" Luke shouted, even if no one was alive to hear him. He dove backward, digging under one body, then another. There were so many, he crawled and crawled, burrowing toward the center of the earth, putting a blanket of dead men between him and the boy. Boom! He heard the explosion, muffled by the bodies, and he felt the heat wave. He heard the shrieks of the next wave of dying. But then another explosion came, and another, and another. Luke was fading from the concussions. Maybe he was hit. Maybe he was dying. If this was to die, it wasn't so bad. There was no pain. He thought of the kid, skinny teenager, wide around the middle, like a barrel-chested man. The kid was wearing a suicide vest. He thought of Rebecca, round with child. Darkness took him. At some point, the sun had risen, but there was no warmth in it. The fighting had stopped somehow. He couldn't remember when or how it had ended. The ground was rugged and hard. There were dead bodies everywhere. Skinny, bearded men lay all over the ground, with eyes wide and staring. Luke. His name was Luke. He was sitting on a pile of bodies. He had awakened beneath them, and he had crawled out from under them like a snake. They were piled here like cordwood. He didn't like sitting on them, but it was convenient. It was high enough that it gave him a view down the hillside through the remains of the sandbag wall. But it kept him low enough that no one but a very good sniper could probably get a shot at him. The Taliban didn't have a lot of very good snipers. Some, but not many. And most of the Taliban around here appeared to be dead now. Nearby, he spotted one crawling back down the hill, trailing a line of blood, like the trail of slime that follows a snail. He should really go out there and kill that guy. But he didn't want to risk being in the open. Luke glanced down at himself. He didn't look good. His chest was painted red. He was soaked in the blood of dead men. His body trembled from hunger and from exhaustion. He stared out at the surrounding mountains, just coming into view as the day brightened. It was really a pretty day. This was beautiful country. How many more were out there? How long before they came? He shook his head. He didn't know. It didn't really matter. Any at all would probably be too many. Martinez was sprawled on his back nearby, low in the trench. He was crying. He couldn't move his legs. He'd had enough. He wanted to die. Luke realized he had been tuning out Martinez for a while now.
"Stone," he said. "Hey, Stone, hey, kill me, man. Just kill me. Hey, Stone, listen to me, man."
Luke was numb. "I'm not going to kill you, Martinez. You're going to be all right. We're going to get out of here. And the docs are going to patch you up. So give it a rest, okay?" Nearby, Murphy was sitting on an outcropping of rock, staring into space. He wasn't even trying to take cover. "Murph, get down here. You want a sniper to put a bullet in your head?" Murphy turned and looked at Luke. His eyes were just gone. He shook his head. An exhalation of air escaped from him. It sounded almost like laughter. He stayed right where he was. As Luke watched, Murphy took out a pistol. It was incredible that he still had a gun on him. Luke had been fighting with his bare hands, rocks, and sharp objects for he didn't know how long. Murphy put the barrel of the gun to the side of his head, eyes on Luke the entire time. He pulled the trigger. Click. He pulled the trigger several more times. Click, 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 click. Click. "Out," he said. He threw the gun away. It clattered down the hillside. Luke watched the gun bounce away. It seemed to go on for longer than he would ever expect. Eventually, it slid to a stop in a scree of loose rocks. He looked at Murphy again. Murphy just sat there, looking at nothing. If more Taliban came, they were done. Neither one of these guys had much fight left in him, and the only weapon Stone still had was the bent bayonet in his hand. For a moment, he thought idly about picking through some of these dead guys for weapons. He didn't know if he had the strength left to stand. He might have to crawl instead. A line of black insects appeared in the sky far away. He knew what they were in an instant. Helicopters. United States military helicopters. Probably Blackhawks. The cavalry was coming. Luke didn't feel good about that, or bad. He felt nothing at all.